Most market shoppers didn't notice how the tomato vendor's nose could identify chemical treatments from across the market, or how his eyes tracked produce that looked too perfect for organic farming. They just wanted fresh vegetables. They had no idea they were buying from someone who once investigated pesticide poisoning cases that killed dozens of farm workers. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of environmental vigilance and protecting our food supply, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Central Valley Farmers Market opened every Saturday at 7 a.m., transforming the downtown park into a bustling maze of white tents, colorful produce, and the kind of community atmosphere that made people believe in the simple goodness of locally grown food. Vendors arrived before dawn to arrange their displays, and customers lined up early for the best selections of organic vegetables, fresh herbs, and artisanal products. Robert Martinez set up his stand in the same corner spot every week, arranging tomatoes, peppers, and leafy greens with the careful attention of someone who understood that presentation was half of successful sales. At 66, he looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a retired engineer who had discovered a passion for organic farming and wanted to share the fruits of his labor with his community. But Robert's senses operated differently than those of other vendors. While most farmers focused on appearance, pricing, and customer service, Robert automatically scanned the market for chemical signatures that shouldn't exist in organic produce. His nose could detect pesticide residues from 30 feet away. His eyes recognized the artificial uniformity that came from industrial chemical treatments. And his trained instincts constantly evaluated environmental contamination in ways that had nothing to do with weekend farmers' market sales. What the market customers didn't know was that Robert Martinez had never been an engineer. For 18 years, he'd been Special Agent Robert Martinez, EPA Criminal Investigation Division, specializing in environmental crimes, illegal pesticide trafficking, and chemical contamination cases that threatened public health. He'd investigated agricultural operations that poisoned groundwater, tracked smuggling networks that brought banned chemicals across international borders, and built cases against corporations that treated farm worker safety as an acceptable business expense. His retirement 4 years ago had been well earned. His ability to detect environmental crimes through sensory recognition had been permanent. "Morning, Robert," said Susan Chen, a regular customer who always arrived early for the best tomatoes. "These look beautiful. Still completely organic?" "Absolutely," Robert replied, but his attention was on the vendor 3 stalls down, where produce displays showed signs of chemical enhancement that made his EPA training activate for the first time since retirement. Perfect uniformity in tomato size, artificial shine on peppers that indicated wax coating beyond normal organic standards, and most concerning, the faint chemical odor that customers would never notice, but that made Robert's trained senses recognize the signature of banned agricultural substances. "Thanks, Robert," Susan said, bagging her vegetables. "I feel so much better knowing I'm feeding my family organic food." Robert smiled and completed the transaction, but his mind was calculating the implications of chemical contamination being sold as organic certification. During his EPA career, he'd seen cases where illegal pesticide use in organic farms had caused severe illness in children whose parents thought they were providing the safest possible food. Over the next hour, as the market filled with families seeking healthy produce options, Robert found himself conducting the kind of covert observation that had characterized his federal career. The problematic vendors' customers were primarily families with young children and elderly people, exactly the populations most vulnerable to chemical poisoning. "Excuse me," said a young mother, pushing a stroller, "are your tomatoes really organic? I'm trying to avoid any chemicals for my baby's food." "Certified organic," Robert assured her, handing her the finest tomatoes from his display. But as she walked away, he watched her stop at the contaminated vendor's stand, attracted by prices that were significantly lower than legitimate organic certification could support. By 10 a.m., Robert was doing something he hadn't done since his official retirement. He was building a case, not an obvious investigation, just careful documentation of evidence that suggested systematic violation of organic certification standards, combined with illegal use of banned agricultural chemicals. He noted vendor behavior, photographed produce displays, and collected samples using techniques that looked like normal quality control to any casual observer. That evening, Robert called a number he hadn't used in 4 years. EPA Criminal Investigation, Agent Lisa Valdez speaking. "Lisa, this is Robert Martinez." There was a pause. "Robert, how's the farming life treating you?" "Quietly," Robert said, sitting at his kitchen table with soil samples and photographs that looked like weekend market documentation, but represented potential evidence of federal environmental crimes. "Lisa, I need to report suspected organic certification fraud combined with illegal pesticide distribution." Agent Valdez had worked with Robert for 5 years before his retirement. She knew that when Robert Martinez called about suspected environmental crimes, it usually meant discovering violations that could affect thousands of people. "What are you seeing?" Robert provided details with the precision that had made him legendary in EPA enforcement. Chemical signatures, regulatory violations, contamination patterns, and health risks that suggested systematic fraud designed to profit from families seeking safe food for their children. "Robert," Valdez said after he finished, "will need to coordinate with agricultural inspectors and health authorities. Can you maintain observation while we develop the investigation?" "Affirmative," Robert said. "I'm there every Saturday. If this is part of a larger distribution network, the patterns will become clearer with continued observation." What happened next was 18 years of environmental crime investigation experience compressed into the most important farmers' market season of Robert's civilian life. He returned the following Saturday, not just as a vendor selling organic tomatoes, but as an experienced federal agent conducting surveillance in an environment where criminals thought they were invisible among legitimate organic farmers. Over the next month, Robert identified the full scope of the operation. The problematic vendor wasn't just selling chemically contaminated produce as organic. He was distributing banned pesticides to other farms and coordinating a network that was systematically defrauding organic certification across 3 counties. "We've arrested 6 suspects and seized over $2 million in illegal agricultural chemicals," Valdez told him during a briefing at his farm after the operation concluded. The contamination network was affecting over 40 farms and approximately 15,000 families who thought they were buying certified organic produce. "What about the health impact assessment?" Robert asked. "Preliminary tests showed dangerous levels of banned pesticides in products that were being sold directly to families with infants and elderly consumers. Your identification of the pattern prevented what could have been a public health crisis." The investigation revealed that the criminal network had been operating for over 2 years, using the farmers' market system to distribute contaminated products directly to the most vulnerable populations while generating profits from organic pricing premiums. Local news covered the story as a major agricultural fraud bust by federal environmental authorities. With no mention of the farmers' market vendor who had recognized the chemical signatures of environmental crime or the EPA retiree who had provided the expertise that protected thousands of families from toxic exposure. A few weeks later, the farmers' market organizers approached Robert about serving on their vendor certification committee. "Robert," said Market Director Janet Williams, "we understand you have some background in agricultural quality control?" Robert looked around the market, where families were shopping for produce they trusted to be safe for their children, elderly couples were seeking healthy food options, and vendors were working to provide legitimate organic alternatives to industrial agriculture. Some, he said simply, we'd like to implement stronger standards for organic verification. Would you be willing to help develop those protocols? Of course, Robert replied. Food safety is important, especially for families who are trying to protect their children from chemical exposure. What the market organizers didn't know was that they'd just asked one of the country's most experienced environmental crime investigators to design security systems for protecting farmers, market customers, from exactly the kind of toxic contamination he'd spent his career fighting. Robert never told the other vendors about his EPA background or the international chemical smuggling networks he'd dismantled. He never mentioned the agricultural corporations he'd prosecuted or the farm worker poisoning cases he'd investigated. He just sold organic vegetables every Saturday, watched for chemical signatures that indicated environmental crimes, and quietly ensured that families seeking healthy food weren't being poisoned by criminals exploiting their trust. But word spread through environmental law enforcement that if anyone noticed unusual agricultural violations in the Central Valley area, they should probably consult with the tomato vendor at the Saturday farmers market. Not officially, of course, just as a professional courtesy to someone who understood how environmental criminals operated. Every Saturday morning, Robert continued his routine. He arrived early, arranged his produce with care, and maintained the kind of vigilant observation that had kept him at the forefront of environmental crime investigation for nearly 2 decades. Most Saturdays, the biggest challenge was explaining the difference between heirloom varieties and hybrid tomatoes. But some Saturdays, when his trained senses detected chemical contamination that threatened public health, Robert Martinez was exactly where he needed to be, between families seeking safe food and criminals who would poison them for profit. Because that's what you do when you've spent your career investigating environmental crimes that threaten entire communities. You don't stop when you retire. You just find a new way to protect people from toxins they can't detect, and sometimes the most sophisticated environmental monitoring in a community is provided by someone who looks like they're just trying to sell fresh vegetables. Robert had spent 18 years tracking chemical contamination through complex regulatory systems and international smuggling networks. Now he spent his retirement ensuring that one farmer's market remained a place where families could trust that organic meant what it was supposed to mean. The mission was the same. The chemicals were the same. The only difference was that now, instead of building federal cases from EPA headquarters, he sold tomatoes while protecting customers from environmental crimes they couldn't smell, taste, or see. And every Saturday, as families filled their bags with fresh produce they trusted to be safe for their children, Robert Martinez watched with the nose and eyes of someone who knew the difference between legitimate organic farming and criminal contamination, ready to protect both the market and the community it fed. So the next time you shop at your local farmer's market, remember that the vendor selling you vegetables might have expertise far beyond agricultural knowledge. The person explaining the benefits of organic farming might be the same person ensuring that organic certification means protection rather than profit-driven deception. Have you ever met someone like Robert? Someone whose retirement work perfectly positioned them to use their professional expertise for community protection? Share their story in the comments below. Tell us about the quiet professionals who never stop protecting the food supply we depend on. Thank you for watching The Human Stories. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who believes in protecting families from environmental crimes. Because the world needs more people like Robert Martinez, professionals who understand that some missions are too important to end with retirement. Until next time, remember that guardians come in all forms. Sometimes they wear EPA badges and investigate corporate violations. Sometimes they sell tomatoes and watch for chemical contamination. but they're always protecting communities from environmental threats, always ensuring that safe food remains safe, always ready to recognize the toxic dangers that criminals hide behind organic labels. And sometimes the most important food safety in your neighborhood comes from someone who spent their career learning exactly how environmental criminals operate and refuses to let them poison families in any community he calls home.